Hello, and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Anne Marie Hilton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about the pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest we move forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex social issues facing people on the planet. For June, we're focusing on hidden talents. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Susan Howell, who teaches at Campbellsville University. Her research interests reflect an integration of psychology and faith. Dr. Howell has looked at how our personality influences our faith experiences and what we want in our relationships with other Christians. Her latest book, Varied Talents, specifically focuses on how gendered socialization influences our behavior and expectations. Dr. Campbell thoroughly enjoys helping students reach their professional goals in an atmosphere where we are free to integrate our discipline with our faith experience. Let's get into the interview. Dr. Susan Howell is a writer, speaker, and professor of psychology based in Central Kentucky. He has written extensively on the topic of gender equality. Dr. Howell teaches classes on gender studies and integrating faith and psychology at Campbellsville University. Dr. Howell and her husband, a Baptist minister, have worked within the church throughout their 40 years of marriage to create more inclusive communities in the congregations they serve. During this time, they have consistently raised awareness and advocated for equality between women and men in each sphere of life. Dr. Howell's book, Varied Talents, opens the realm of traditional Christianity to show how God's love is more progressive and inclusive than many people think. Welcome, Dr. Howell.
Thank you. Whenever I went to college, I had expectations of teaching, but I had planned to teach high school, and English was always something that I enjoyed, so that was my plan. And then when I started taking psychology classes and really a lot of the courses, social science, I just realized that I'm so fascinated with people, and the idea of spending my life doing that just sounded wonderful. And at the time, I had planned to become a therapist. That was my goal. And so I studied everything that I could about psychology and had plans of graduate school and one day being a therapist. And as I got into graduate school, I realized how much I really enjoyed teaching. And so then my career path took a slightly different turn. And now, of course, I teach and do research and writing, and it took on that. But I really love my job. I can't imagine doing anything else except teaching psychology to young adults. It's just been a wonderful experience.
Wow. And then, one of the things that I found interesting is that, you also are coming from a faith perspective.
Right.
Being that you also, since you are married to a minister, and that, and I'm making the assumption, of course, that, you spend time outside of work sometimes with other colleagues that are studying psychology as well. Has
right.
Having that faith perspective, has it given you a different insight, would you say, than maybe some of the other people that you work with or socialize with that, that they may not have?
Well, I don't know that it has. I've taught in different settings. Right now, I am at a Baptist campus, and the colleagues that I have there are also Christians, and so I don't find that there is a big difference in terms of how we integrate our faith in with our practice. I had also taught, however, at state schools, and even there, a lot of the psychologists that I knew that were on faculty at those schools had some type of a faith experience, and I didn't find that there was a lot of difference in the way we approach things. We all came at what we were doing from the aspect that It's good for us to study. It's good for us to apply the scientific method in understanding people and human beings as really a part of our faith experience, believing that God created us and that we are to be good stewards of all God's given us. And if we want to be at work trying to make a difference for people, then it's a good thing for us to study God's creation, including humanity, and then learn what we can about what makes us tick and how we can jump in and help people when they are needing help. And so I haven't actually found a big difference between my perspective and those of my colleagues. Like I say, even though part of the time that I have been teaching, it has been at institutions that weren't religious per se.
Let's start at the top and talk about let's define for people what is gender socialization and how does that play out in society?
Okay. Gendered socialization is anything that happens that tends to channel us in one direction or another based purely on whether or not we're male or female. And so, whereas that can be certainly some very overt statements that are made to us sometimes, like, for instance, telling our daughter that you can't be that when you grow up because that's something that boys do or it's something that men do, or telling your son that he shouldn't go into a certain line of work because that's something that's more suitable for women, or, whether it's something in our faith, for instance, telling women that they can't be a church leader, or telling a boy or a man that they shouldn't stay in the nursery or cook for a potluck or whatever. It can be something that overt, but my book looks rather at the very subtle implicit messages, the things that very often fly under our radar. We don't notice. And I argue the fact that we don't notice those messages that are implicit makes them even more powerful because we can't counteract them. For instance, maybe our parents overtly say, you can be anything you want to be. But when a girl doesn't want a Barbie doll for her birthday, but instead would like a chemistry set, or maybe their son likes playing with the kitchen set, and instead they push a ball into his hands and tell him to go back and play, that even though those aren't overt messages, they still communicate something about what arena of life we should be focusing our attention on. And I argue that that is actually more powerful, because if someone tells me, Susan, you can't do that because you're a woman, immediately I would notice that and I would act against it. However, when I'm given a subtle message, something that I don't even notice until tomorrow or next week or next month or next year, then it's already had an effect before I have realized what's happened.
Yes, and one of the other things I think that people bring up, and doing these subtle things that we don't even notice that have gender socialization to them. Now, I feel we are in a place in society where there's a question, because right now I would say gender is being questioned. I was going to say gender is being questioned in general, but yes, that's true, actually.
Right. Right.
And with that, there's the other question, like, should genders be defined, and should roles of genders be defined? And I'm asking you also because you have both the psychology background, but also from a Christian faith background, which, when we look at specifically, I would say monotheistic religions, that in those religions, usually there is sort of a, defining of roles for male and female. And so how should we approach those in society, or should we have definitions, or here's another, or are we looking at it all wrong?
Well, I think that it's, different cultures have had different gender roles, and I look at it that when the Bible was written, there were different things going on in societies that maybe made it more appropriate. I don't know. I'm not a theologian, so I really hate to address areas where it's not my expertise, but I don't see that the way our society is set up now, it certainly wouldn't require that we have such problematic gender roles in the way we conduct the world or the church. For instance, today it is completely reasonable that a woman can go out and get a job and do the same kinds of things that her husband does, because in our culture today, women are given the right to get an education, and we have laws in place even that should protect, doesn't always obviously, but should protect her from being discriminated against at the work site and so on. And so there is no reason that we would have to have strict gender rules, and yet we do still find that women do face more discrimination and lower pay scale and so on than really is necessary. So just in terms of whether or not those gender roles should exist, my focus has been in this book, The Varied Talents, looking at how that plays out in terms of the work world and the church world. And I don't see any reason why those roles need to be set up and still so rigidly followed in our world today.
I think so, because we are moving into, it's almost like I was talking to someone, like you don't have time. I guess this is my practicalities coming out, but you don't have time to wait around for someone. When you need to get something done, you have to either learn how to do it yourself or do it. Because things are moving so fast. Like you can't be like, well, I can't do that because, you can't do it. Well, we'll find somebody that will, and just, so right now, to be, I guess set too rigid in a role, you might get run over.
Right. Exactly.
Essentially, because things are moving at a pace that, I don't think we ever expected them to out here.
I think so.
And so, there is that pull, though. There is that segment of society that's like, wait, this is not how it was supposed to be because of tradition and things like that. But in that, I guess, and so there is a group, and a such group, I would say, of men and women that think this way. And so what do you think is really, I guess, holding women back, I guess, from necessarily being all that they could be in the society?
I think some of it is the fact that we focus so much on the overt socialization. Like I was saying before, for instance, if we have never had a parent say to us, oh, you can't do that because you're a man or a woman, then we assume that we had total freedom to go any direction that we wanted in terms of our career or in terms of our faith or what have you. And that isn't true. I think what I try to communicate with my students is that's great. If you haven't had anyone overtly tell you that you can't do something, that's wonderful. That doesn't, however, mean that you haven't been influenced in a multitude of ways. And so what I try to get my students to see are all of the many ways that everything from the toys we're given as children to the kind of chores that we were assigned, to the books that we were handed or that were read to us, or the television shows that we were encouraged to watch, the number of women who were in leading roles as opposed to men, all of those things, even the textbooks that we read in school that basically made it look like the norm for the world was being basically a white man. And that if you weren't a white man, that you were somehow subpar, or you were somehow the exception to the rule, and that you weren't really the main event. And so anything that was about women or anyone who wasn't white was very often put into a sidebar or a box or a diagram or a chapter at the end of the textbook. And in so many of those ways, the message is communicating to women that they are secondary, that their role is to take care of all of the behind the scenes stuff so that men can go out and be the main event. One of the things that I talk about in my book are the chores that are very often assigned. We still, even in 2023, research shows that a girl is much more often assigned the chores that need to be done every day, like watching the young children or helping to cook dinner or throwing a load of laundry in the washer or washing the dishes. And boys are still, by far, given more of the chores, things that need to be sporadic, that need to be done sporadic. Like, for instance, helping dad work on the guitar or helping dad to paint the house or fixing something when it's broken. And so even that communicates to these young girls that when you are out there as an adult working, you are also going to need to be doing these chores that need to be done every single day. And so you might want to think about a job that doesn't require you to be there as often. And so if we narrow then our choice of occupations to those which don't require that we be there as often, that we can leave early, that we don't have a big responsibility there, we're looking basically at jobs where we're not going to be paid as much. We're not going to have a whole lot of decision-making responsibility. And if we are then communicating to boys that what you do around the house is only going to be sporadic, so you have freedom to go out and find a job. And if it takes more hours of your day, that's fine, because you're probably going to have a wife, and she'll be the one that's cooking the meals and watching the children and making sure that the house is clean and that the shopping is done and clothes are laundered. And that right there sets boys and girls up for very different expectations about themselves later as career men and women. So in answer to your question, I think one thing I try to communicate to my children and my students, basically everybody who will listen to me, is that there are so many subtle ways that we're told what we should do and what we shouldn't, what's expected of us and what isn't. And that has a far greater impact than so many of the overt messages. So I think that's a great place to start, is for us to become aware of the subtle messages and then to take steps that we don't continue that with our own children and our nieces and nephews and grandchildren. So
in my mind, what I started equating things in, I was thinking out about a piece of paper in my mind, and I was putting one side was responsibility, the other side was called freedom.
Right.
And so that, and you know, and I started thinking back to even my own childhood, where, yeah, I was being taught how to, you know, clean the house, cook the dinner, make sure, you know, all these things were done before you even go out the door. And,
Right.
you know, brothers were just like, okay, get out there, have fun.
Right.
So, yes. You know, and I didn't even think about that, but it's until you brought it up. But yes, you're not even, and you didn't even double think about it when you were a kid. You just thought that's just how the way it was, right? But now when I think back, I was like, I should have been out there and having fun.
Yeah. And you know, whenever we're children and we're just given that, that's just what kids do. We tend to just accept that. And I have students who will, whenever I talk about this in class, they'll say, well, but there's really nothing wrong with learning how to take care of a house. Well, of course there isn't, but why is it still that we tend to give more of those chores to the women or to the girls, and then they grow up to be women who see that as more or less their job or their responsibility? And I think this kind of feeds into some of the stereotypes that we have today of the woman who knows how to do everything at the house, and her husband's never going to wash the dishes to suit her. He's never going to do laundry to suit her. He's not going to know how to take care of the child. And she's sort of rolling her eyes and gritting her teeth about how, it takes a woman to make this stuff happen. And maybe it wouldn't if we raised our sons to know that they were as responsible as their sisters are, the helping to get a meal on the table, or getting the laundry folded and put up, or learning how to do outside work as well. So I think then if we did that, we might find that a lot of the narrative that we hear from couples who complain about, I hear the women who complain about their husbands won't do things around the house. Well, maybe they would if they had been taught that was part of their responsibility.
Yes, and I think we're at a time where that we can't, especially when we did not have access to services and all those different things. Your partner in the house had to step up because there was nobody else. Because you might catch, this horrible virus, and that would be the end of you.
Right.
So it was just like, well, this is a do or die situation, literally, sweetie. Yes,
right.
So you're gonna have to help because we might not make it.
Yeah.
Yes. And so. Yes, so I think this is like the perfect time, and definitely, I'm sure you saw that for your book coming out, Buried Talents, that this is the time where people are the most open to it because they saw one person cannot do all of this stuff and be okay. Or can the household be okay?
Exactly.
People literally started cracking, that's why we have now this mental health, crisis and all this stuff that is unfolding. Because of the stress and pressures that were being put on people, specifically, we'll say women, because we found that women during the pandemic, they were likely to leave the workforce, were doing most of the caretaking because that was how the role was before. And it compounded because not only now were they just doing the, standard childcare of, feeding, clothing, and making sure the child, stays alive, but now they had the school work, and then, a little bit of therapy sessions for everybody in the household as well, and to keep the whole house, running. And then you had a daily life thing. And the ones that did continue working, then you had work that was also at home. As I'm just putting this list, it already sounds like we're just waiting for, a bomb to go off. And I'm sure you're familiar with Sheryl Sandberg and her company Lean In, right?
Yes.
And so, and with Lean In, for those of our audience that aren't familiar with it, Lean In is encouraging women to be all they can be from a career standpoint. So don't refuse that, director position because now, it's going to be more responsibility or take your career to a different level of, being able to go out there and be an entrepreneur if you want. So Lean In, the whole program encourages women to, thrive in their careers. But one of the other things that people were like, well, during the pandemic, a lot of people saw that they were leaning in and necessarily that it wasn't necessarily what they wanted. Right. And so why I'm bringing this up is that even in, our gendered society, and, we've been pushing, I would say, both genders, but women more and more, because more households, women are actually now leading the way, in some cases financially in their household. And once we've gotten to that point, now it's kind of put things of I guess my question is even coming up about choice. Like, I feel like women have been not necessarily able to choose the life that they want.
But
And I guess, how have you seen that play out for women?
well, I tell my students that a lot of times what we say is a choice isn't so much a choice. Like, for instance, if anyone, but very often it does happen with women, if a woman says, well, she made the choice to stay at home with her children, well, it wasn't actually a free choice. If she was always expected to do that, and she was given the mindset that she needed to do that, and she wasn't encouraged to get an education outside of, whatever was required, and she didn't have a lot of career options. And then when the child comes along, her husband is the one who has the job, the income, the insurance that is being provided for the family through his work. And then when she says, well, I made the choice then to stay at home, it wasn't so much a choice as it was pretty much the way it had to happen if they were going to continue with their lifestyle and income and of the benefits that go along with this job. I think what would be more of a choice is if we raised our daughters the way we raise our sons, to let them know that they do have options, and to encourage the higher education, encourage them to have a career, encourage them to follow their call, and not to just assume that their call absolutely has to be getting married and having children, because some women that isn't. But if we encourage everyone, male and female, to follow their, and then later, if they make that choice of what they want to do with their time, and that it does include being at home with children, or going out and working, or doing something part-time where they can do some of both, then if they make that choice, we can say that it is actually indeed a choice. So what I try to communicate with my students is that for it to be a true choice, you have to have really good options. And if you don't, then it's not so much a choice.
Yes, and I think, definitely that becomes something that all women have to face when they make the decision if they're going to start a family or not. Yes, because somebody has to take care of the kids.
Right. And I think part of it is that we need to start training our sons, too, that being a dad doesn't mean that you get to go out to work every day, and any sacrifice that's made with a career needs to be made by your wife. That men also sometimes need to be the ones to take off when a child is sick, or if there is a need for someone to stop working for a while during a season of the family's life, that he should be willing to make that sacrifice as readily as he expects his wife to make. And not to say that men should always be the one to make the sacrifices. That system wouldn't be any more fair or any more productive than the one we have. But I do believe that boys need to be raised knowing that when they become a dad, they should make equal sacrifices, just as they expect their wives to. And that sometimes they do need to be the one to take off work, or to deny a promotion, or to come home because the child is sick and needs someone to be with them. And I just think that we need to raise children across the board where they know that they truly do have options, and that some of those options will be in terms of taking care of a family, and some of those options will be outside in the world of work. So I just think that we need to provide more of that to both boys and.
I wanted to talk about, when you finished that question, it brought up the idea of the helpmate idea to me, and how people think of, from a traditional monotheistic perspective, that, the subjugation of the other, of women being helpmate. But I was bringing up the idea of the stool with, only one leg, that it doesn't, that helpmate And the way people are understanding is not like, if you don't have an equal sized leg, it's going to fall.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And from what you have, from, written and how, your perspective is that in the society of being able to see women that we are on the equal level, trying to hold the same stool up.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of times we don't look at it that way. I think instead we think of that word helpmate as something that's going to be like an assistant or an underling. And I don't think that that's probably what was intended.
Right, exactly. And I think that is something that I've seen misunderstood in for a lot of people in religion. They're like, oh, I'm not supposed to do that but especially when it comes to raising a child, right? A child needs all different aspects of from two different people or different individuals. They say it takes a village, right? So the two people that brought the child in the world may not have all that the child needs, and so in that it isn't an unequal partnership, just as, it's just like, I like to put it even as a company, right? So you have maybe an executive board. Not everybody on the executive board can be doing the same role because it wouldn't make sense, because then we just have people essentially working over each other, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I've tried to communicate in Mary Talents, and I know many other writers have done the same, is that even when we have different roles as human beings, as individuals, as mom or dad or co-workers at an office or even within the church, we don't need to segregate those roles into what's the work of a woman or what's the work of a man. That it's kind of like what you said early on in this, is that if the work needs to be done, then somebody needs to do it. And so that work doesn't necessarily have to be done by a man. And so I think that it's good when we have that freedom to follow wherever we're gifted. And that if a man is more gifted in some caring for children, or if a woman is more gifted in finance, then why does the nursery at church have to be staffed by women, or the finance committee staffed by men?
Right, exactly. And and we are definitely in that world that we need to look at it that way, because I do not think that we're going to be slowing down anytime soon.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, in fact, I'm trying to hope that I'm like, I actually, this is just a personal aside, but I feel like, for me, I'm like, I need to even I got to work out more, to mentally prepare, because it looks like in 5 years, you're going to be like, maybe doing computers in the air and everybody's going to be like, right. Everything's going to be digital. You're going to be like, I'm going to get your water out of the faucet. You're going to be like, please, Alexa, I just want a drink.
Right. Who knows where we'll be?
Yeah, just right. Yeah, and I'm just, that's coming from over at my dad's house. He's like one of those people who is, programmed everything. And so you're just like, okay, I want to leave. Please let me leave. Yeah, at the door.
Right.
Yes. So it becomes important. Now I want to dive into your book, Very Talents, and look at it at how women are, I want to look at two things: how women are holding themselves back, and I also, one of the things that becomes a big thing, and I'm sure you've encountered this, how even other women hold women back. Yes,
right.
And how, and how we can, how we can overcome this.
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do how open we are to trying new things. I know that there are times whenever I've taught the gender studies course at the university where I teach, where I will have young women and young men in the class who are very open-minded to considering another perspective and doing things differently in their own homes, in their future families, than what they experienced as children. And that doesn't seem to always fall in line with what you would expect. I know sometimes whenever I'll tell my colleagues that, we had a discussion today and in class, and some people were all for looking at new models of the ways of doing family, and some people weren't. Sometimes my colleagues will say, they will assume that, oh, well, I guess the women must have been all in favor of looking to new ways of doing things, and the men weren't. They were wanting to keep things in kind of a patriarchal mindset. And I say, it's not always that way. I have plenty of men that I teach in my classes who are very open-minded, and I frankly have some women who are not. So I think that, as far as what will move us forward, and like you said, sometimes women came to, of the word that you use, but they seem to have this attitude about women, and it does tend to hold all of us back. And so I think that it comes down to whether you're a woman or a man, being able to consider the way you were brought up and consider what you believe to be true about men and women, and what you believe about roles and what you believe about the Bible, and being very intentional about living out your own beliefs and your own call in your future families, rather than just falling in line with doing it the same way. And I think a lot of that comes down to whether or not you're open-minded and will consider other options. And I find that to be one of the very positive things about the generation of students that I'm teaching right now, is that for the most part, the students that I teach are pretty open-minded. And I've been really gratified to see that. Sometimes they will, even when they themselves were raised with a narrow mindset, they will be pretty open about how they would like things to be different for their own children and in their own marriages and on future families. So I think there's a lot of room for encouragement, and for us to realize that the next generation coming along, they've got some ideas, and they're not willing to just settle for something just because that's the way it's always been.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we are, like I keep saying, but we're definitely, facing different challenges, I think, than we have faced in past generations. And so we can't, look at these, I'll just say future, or they're not even future, or current problems that are going to become
Right.
future calamities.
Right.
Because that's where we're heading if we don't start making changes. So we're going to have to work together in a different way than we have before. One of the sayings I keep saying, there's just no sidelines. You don't have time. Yes. And so one of the other things that I know in your book is about, leadership, and how women, they shied away from leadership roles, but now we have in the U.S., other countries obviously have already passed on this idea and have had female leaders in government, but we, for the first time, have a female vice president, whether we, agree with her or not agree with her, she is still female, and it's, something different. What would you say that women can offer to leadership that, may have not been offered before?
Well, I guess the biggest thing for me is that we are providing, with every woman who does have the position of leadership, we're providing girls and younger women the opportunity to see someone who looks like themselves reaching farther than maybe they thought they could reach themselves. And I think that that's really providing a wonderful service. And like you say, whether or not we we agree with this one or that one or the other one. I think just knowing that there are role models out there that are providing really good implicit messages for these girls that someone like you could reach this level of success.
Yes. And so, the other thing that I wanted to ask you, a simple thing is like when you were writing this book, Buried Talents, because why did you choose to focus on buried talents?
Well, I think because I really appreciate with the analogy that I wrote about it in the epilogue, where the analogy of the servant who buried the talents rather than using them and believing that that was somehow going to be acceptable. And I really like using that analogy here because so many women believe that they're doing the right thing by pushing their talents down.
Let's talk about, I guess, in order for, women to, like right now, I guess I would say that women are facing, I guess not to be my unfiltered self, I would say women are under the microscope and need to make changes to avoid, I don't want to say extermination, but in a way. That's what I believe women are facing, right? Because it's like everything that we looked at women traditionally to be and do and have is questioned, across society. And so I think because women are facing an examination like never before, how would you say that women should proceed to show their value not only to society but to themselves? I think that's what we're really facing. Like, it's that question for women: who are you? How do we answer that?
I think the first thing is we have to know ourselves. And one of the things that I talk about in my book is building your identity and how the different ways that we, as both women and men, form an identity, what goes into that, and then what it does for us through the remainder of our lives. And so I think one most important thing is that we have to be confident in who we are. We have to be willing to do self-examination and to put some thought into the identities that we develop and think about what we want to be. And then once we go ahead then and live out our lives, live out our calling, live out the identity that we have, then I think we will be coming from a stronger position than to get people to listen to us. I think that if we are confident in who we are, that's going to come through. And we have to be willing to not be afraid to be who we are in our homes, in our churches, in the workplace, in the world, in the community. And I think that has to start, though, with our developing a sense of who we are within ourselves. And so I think that's a really good first step. And one thing that I do in the book is I talk about what goes into that, and that if you're struggling with it, what you can do to help yourself to develop a sense of who you are.
Yes. And I think that just it answers so many things. And I think it is the definition of the time that we are, is that right now it's the time to define who you are and what you're for and what you're doing here on this planet, because it's not going to slow down for you.
Right. And ideally, if we can develop that, in our teen years, at our early 20s, that's when it's not that it gets completely developed by then, but it's certainly the time of our life when we put a lot of thought, for the first time, into who we are. And that's wonderful, but it's never too late to do that. And so women who are reading the book or listening to the podcast or on a journey of trying to determine who they are and what their identity is, it's never too late to develop that. And so a lot of the techniques that I talked about in the book hopefully will help people of all ages to be able to put thought to who they are and to take control over the identity that they're developing and how they're presenting that to the world.
Yes. So I encourage everyone to read Dr. Howell's book, Buried Talents. Uncover those talents that you have been hiding, because the world needs them more now than ever. I'd like to thank Dr. Howell for your time and insight. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Howell, you can go to her website, SusanHarrisPowell.com. If you have a passion for an unserved community, a social justice problem, or simply want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.work to start your project of change today. In May 2023, we'll be having our first annual Changemaker Conference. Register to attend now. We're still in the early bird rates, so take advantage. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Project Good, where we're focused on what matters.